It took exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's carefully constructed political persona to completely disintegrate on live television. I know that sounds like hyperbolic clickbait, the kind of promise the internet makes 1,000 times a day and never delivers. But I was there in that studio, watching it unfold in real time. And more importantly, I watched what came after. The fallout, the reckoning, the moment when receipts met reality. And reality won in a knockout so decisive that political science professors are still teaching it as a master class in preparation meeting opportunity. The setting was almost cinematic in its perfection. America Uncensored, a primetime special on the country's fastest-growing conservative network. The format was simple and brutal. 90 minutes, no holds barred, no topic restrictions, no safety net. Just two people, two microphones, and the truth, or in AOC's case, the absence of it. Inside that black briefcase Dan Bongino carried onto the stage were 37 pages that would end a career. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The studio audience that night was a perfect split. Half progressive activists who'd camped out for tickets, half conservative viewers who'd flown in from across the country. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. Camera crews positioned at 8 different angles. Social media teams ready to clip every moment. This wasn't just a debate, this was the Super Bowl of political theater. AOC arrived first, of course. She understood optics. She walked in with members of the squad flanking her like an entourage, all wearing their signature looks, bold colors, confident smiles that practiced, "We're here to make history" energy. The progressive side of the audience erupted in chants of AOC, AOC. She waved, blew kisses, played to every camera. Her stylist had earned their money that night. She looked every bit the revolutionary she branded herself as. Then Bongino walked in, alone. No entourage, no fanfare. Just that black briefcase in his left hand, and an expression that anyone who'd ever worked in law enforcement would recognize instantly. It's the look a detective gets when they've got the suspect dead to rights, and they're just waiting for the right moment to spring the trap. Calm, patient, dangerous. He set the briefcase on his desk with a deliberate slowness that made every camera in the room zoom in on it. AOC's smile faltered for just a second, just a flicker, before she recovered. But I saw it. The audience saw it. And somewhere in the control room, a producer was already telling their team to keep a camera on that briefcase at all times. The moderator, a veteran journalist with 30 years in the business, explained the rules. Each person would get an opening statement, then free-form debate with minimal intervention. The only rule? No personal attacks on family members. Everything else was fair game. AOC went first. She'd clearly rehearsed. She hit all her talking points with practiced precision. Climate justice, economic inequality, the need for bold progressive leadership in dark times. She talked about her district, about working families, about the billionaire class. It was a greatest hits compilation, and her supporters ate it up. 7 minutes of pure progressive red meat. Then it was Bongino's turn. He stood up slowly, buttoned his jacket, and looked directly into the camera. Not at AOC, not at the moderator, but at the millions watching at home. "I didn't come here tonight to debate theory," he said, his voice carrying that unique mix of New York directness and law enforcement authority. "I didn't come here to argue about what socialism means or whether capitalism is moral. I came here with receipts, 37 pages of them. And before this night is over, everyone watching is going to understand exactly who Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez really is. He sat down. 4 sentences. That was his opening statement. The moderator looked confused. "Mr. Bongino, you have 5 more minutes if you'd like." "I'm good," he said, tapping the briefcase. "I'll let my evidence do the talking." AOC laughed, actually laughed. "Receipts? What is this, a Twitter beef? I'm here to discuss serious policy." "Oh, we're going to discuss policy," Bongino interrupted. And that's when his expression changed. The trap was about to spring. "Let's start with last Tuesday, your Tuesday, because I think the American people deserve to know how you spend your days while lecturing them about struggle and sacrifice." He opened the briefcase. Tuesday, November 14th. This was November 14th, Bongino began, pulling out the first document. 9:17 a.m. You posted on Instagram from your apartment in D.C. Beautiful post, actually. Very on brand. You're holding a coffee mug, looking thoughtful, and the caption reads, "Still fighting for a Green New Deal that puts working families first. We can't afford to wait." He held up his phone, showing the post on the big screen. AOC nodded, looking pleased with herself. "Great message," Bongino continued. "Very inspiring. Now, let me show you what happened after you posted that." He pulled out a second document. 12:47 p.m. Your Tesla Model 3, the one you bought last year for $48,000, which is more than the median household income in your district, was valeted at Donatello's, that charming little Manhattan steakhouse where the cheapest entree is $76. The valet receipt, $47 to park your electric vehicle that you drove from D.C. to New York, while telling Americans they need to give up their cars for the climate. A murmur rippled through the audience. AOC's smile was starting to look painted on. "But wait," Bongino said, and there was almost glee in his voice now. "The valet receipt is just the appetizer. Here's the lunch bill." He held it up. The number 300 67 was clearly visible on the screen. $300 for lunch for 2 people. That breaks down to a Wagyu steak, the truffle pasta, excellent choice by the way, a bottle of wine that costs more than most Americans spend on groceries for a week, and dessert. The tip alone was $62. He let that sink in for a moment. "Now, Congresswoman, I'm not saying you can't spend your money however you want. You earned that $174,000 congressional salary. Well, earned might be generous, but you're legally entitled to it. What I'm saying is that you spent more on one lunch than the average Social Security recipient in your district gets for an entire week. And you did it on the same day you posted about fighting for working families." AOC tried to interrupt. "The context of that meeting—" "Oh, I love context," Bongino said, pulling out another document. "Let's add some. After lunch, you went shopping. There's a sustainable fashion boutique 3 blocks from Donatello's. Very trendy, very expensive, very, I'm helping the environment by buying $400 organic cotton t-shirts. Your receipt, $800 for clothes, on the same day you fought for working families." The progressive side of the audience was getting quieter. The conservative side was leaning forward, energized. And then, and this is my favorite part, at 6:43 p.m., you tweeted, and I quote, "Families across America are struggling to afford groceries while billionaires get tax breaks. This is immoral." End quote. See card. Bongino looked up from his papers directly at AOC. "So let me make sure I understand your definition of morality, Congresswoman. In one day, one single day, you spent more on lunch than a minimum wage worker makes in a week. You spent more on clothes than most families spend on groceries in a month. You drove a car that costs a year's salary for the people you claim to represent. And then you had the audacity to lecture America about struggling families. The silence in the studio was deafening. The Green New Deal isn't about saving the planet, Bongino said, his voice dropping to something almost conversational, almost sad. It's about making sure your Tesla has a charging station while truckers in Ohio lose their jobs. It's about making sure you feel good about your choices while working Americans can't afford to heat their homes. That's not environmentalism, Congresswoman. That's elitism with a socialist bumper sticker slapped on it. The conservative side of the audience exploded. Applause, cheers, the kind of reaction that comes when someone finally says what half the country has been thinking. AOC was stammering now, trying to find her footing. This is taken out of context. That meeting was with environmental advocates. Environmental advocates who ate $150 steaks? Bongino raised an eyebrow. Interesting strategy for fighting climate change. I'm sure the cows appreciated the irony. Even some of the progressives in the audience laughed at that one. But don't worry, Bongino said, closing the first section of his briefcase. That was just Tuesday. We've got 4 years of Tuesdays to talk about. And if you're watching at home, and you're tired of politicians who preach equality while living like royalty, trust me, you're going to want to see what comes next, because that was just the appetizer. AOC tried to pivot, tried to regain control. She launched into her talking points about corporate greed, about standing up to Amazon, about her proudest moment as a congresswoman, stopping Amazon's HQ2 from coming to Queens. I stood up to one of the most powerful corporations in the world, she said, her confidence returning. I said no to corporate welfare, no to gentrification, no to putting profits over people. Bongino let her finish, actually let her bask in the applause from her supporters for a full 10 seconds. Then he spoke, and his voice had changed. There was something harder in it now, something personal. You stood up, all right. You stood up and kicked 25,000 families right in the teeth. And I know this personally, Congresswoman, because I spent the last 6 months interviewing them. Let me introduce you to some of the people whose lives you decided weren't worth a corporate tax break. He pulled out a tablet, queued up a video. This is Maria Rodriguez, 54 years old, lives in Corona, Queens, raised 3 kids as a single mother while working 2 jobs. When Amazon announced HQ2, Maria applied for a construction administration position. The job paid $78,000 a year. That would have been more than both her current jobs combined. She was qualified. She made it to the second round of interviews. The video showed Maria, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes, sitting in her small apartment. I believed her, Maria said on the video, her voice thick with emotion. When the Congresswoman said she was fighting for us, I believed her. But that job would have changed my life. My daughter could have gone to college without loans. I could have retired someday. Now I'm still working at the diner, still cleaning offices at night, and I'm still wondering what my life could have been. Bongino stopped the video. The studio was silent. That's one person, Congresswoman. Let me show you another. Another video. A young Asian man, late 20s, sitting in what looked like a coffee shop. James Chen, 28, computer science degree from CUNY, grew up in Flushing, was offered a software engineering position at Amazon HQ2. Starting salary, $120,000. When you killed the deal, James moved to Seattle to take a job at Amazon there. He's not in Queens anymore. His parents are still there. His community is still there. But he's not. Because you decided that corporate greed was worse than actual paychecks for actual people. AOC was trying to maintain her composure, but cracks were showing. These are individual anecdotes. Individual anecdotes? Bongino's voice rose for the first time. These are human beings. These are your constituents. But you're right. Let's talk about the bigger picture. Let's talk about the numbers you apparently never bothered to calculate before you tanked 25,000 jobs. He pulled out a bound report, dramatically thick. This is an economic impact study conducted by 3 separate economists, one liberal, one conservative, one independent. They all came to the same conclusion. The Amazon deal wouldn't have just created 25,000 direct jobs. The ripple effect would have created an additional 67,000 indirect jobs. Construction workers building the facilities were to restaurant workers serving the employees, retail workers in the stores that would have opened, service industry jobs, small business opportunities. He flipped through pages. The total economic impact over 10 years, $27 billion. That's billion with a B in tax revenue alone. After accounting for the breaks Amazon would have gotten, New York would have netted $18 billion. The average salary of those 25,000 jobs, $150,000. Do you know what that means for a community? Bongino looked directly at AOC. It means families who can afford to buy homes, kids who can go to college, small businesses that thrive because people have disposable income. It means a thriving, growing community, instead of one that's struggling. He pulled out more documents, but let's talk about the real hypocrisy here. 6 months after you killed those jobs, where did you move? You upgraded from your modest Queens apartment to a luxury building in Navy Yard, D.C. Rent, $3,400 a month. Now, I did some math. I know math isn't your strong suit, but bear with me. That's $48,800 a year just in rent. You know what Maria Rodriguez could do with an extra $48,800 a year? She could send her daughter to a state school without loans. She could retire in dignity. She could live the life you're already living. The audience was riveted. This wasn't just political debate anymore. This was personal. But Maria didn't get the Amazon job, Bongino continued, because you stood on your high horse and decided that corporate greed was the real enemy, not unemployment, not poverty, not the lack of opportunity. Corporate greed. And you made that decision from a position of privilege that Maria will never know. He pulled out printed tweets, enlarged on the screen. Let's look at your own words, shall we? March 2018, before the Amazon announcement. Queens needs good-paying jobs that allow families to thrive. Your words. November 2018, after you killed the deal. We don't need jobs from bad corporations. Your words. February 2019, 3 months later, posting from a $40 brunch spot in D.C. Sometimes you need to treat yourself. Bongino's voice dripped with contempt. You treated yourself all right. You treated yourself to a national profile. You treated yourself to celebrity. You treated yourself to a lifestyle that working-class people can only dream about. And all it cost was 25,000 jobs for the people you swore to represent. He pulled out one final document. This is a letter. Actually, it's 127 letters from small business owners in Queens whose businesses closed in the aftermath of losing Amazon. Restaurant owners who were planning expansions, construction companies that lost contracts, retail stores that shuttered because the economic boom they anticipated never came. He read from one letter. Dear Congresswoman, my family owned our deli for 32 years. We survived recessions, 9/11, Hurricane Sandy, but we couldn't survive you. We took out loans to expand, to hire more people, because we believed in the Amazon project. When you killed it, we were left with debt we couldn't pay and dreams we couldn't fulfill. We closed in May. My father cried for the first time in my life. I hope your principles were worth it. Signed, Luis Sanchez, former owner of Sanchez Deli, Corona, Queens. The silence in the studio was absolute. You didn't fight corporate greed, Congresswoman, Bongino said quietly. You fought opportunity. You fought dreams. You fought the chance for working-class families to have what you already have. And the people of Queens, they're still waiting for those jobs you promised would come. Spoiler alert, they're not coming. But your rent is paid, your Tesla is charged, and your Instagram following is growing. So I guess that's what really matters. AOC tried to respond, her voice shaking. The gentrification that would have resulted. Gentrification? Bongino's laugh was harsh. You want to talk about gentrification? You moved out of Queens. You literally gentrified yourself out of your own district. The hypocrisy is so thick, I'm choking on it. The moderator tried to intervene, to give AOC a chance to recover. But Bongino held up his hand. No, I'm not done. Because the people watching at home need to understand something. This isn't about one failed deal. This is about a pattern. A pattern of choosing ideology over people, choosing headlines over help, choosing your brand over your responsibility. He looked into the camera. And if you know someone who lost their job, their business, or their dream because of this decision, share this moment with them, because politicians need to know that we remember, we keep receipts, and eventually, everyone pays for their choices. The moderator called for a brief break, 10 minutes. When they came back, you could see AOC had been coached during the intermission. She came out swinging, trying to take control of the narrative. Let's talk about the real issue facing our generation, she said, her voice strong again. Climate change is an existential threat. The Green New Deal is the only plan bold enough to address it. And if that makes people uncomfortable, if that challenges the status quo, then good. We need revolutionary change. Bongino waited. He actually smiled. Revolutionary change, he repeated. I love that phrase. You know what else is revolutionary? A $93 trillion bill that would bankrupt every American alive today, and their children, and their grandchildren. Let's talk about your Green New Deal, Congresswoman. But let's skip the rhetoric and do the math. And I know math isn't your strong suit. You did study economics at BU, right? How'd that work out? The audience laughed. AOC's jaw tightened. Your plan requires retrofitting every building in America. Bongino began, his tone shifting into something almost professorial. That's 136 million structures, everything from homes to offices to warehouses. The average cost to retrofit a building to the standards required by your plan, and these numbers come from the construction industry, not from me, is roughly $50,000 per structure. Some more, some less, but that's the average. He pulled out a calculator for theatrical effect. 136 million times $50,000. That's $6.8 trillion just for the buildings, before we've even talked about the power grid, which would need to be completely rebuilt to handle the electrical load of an all-electric economy. The electrical grid rebuild, $4.5 trillion, according to the Department of Energy's own estimates. He was writing numbers on a digital board now, and they were projecting on screens around the studio. Then there's your plan to eliminate air travel. Just ban it. Tell Americans they can't fly anymore. Instead, you want to build high-speed rail across the entire country, coast to coast, border to border. The estimated cost for a comprehensive high-speed rail system, $2 trillion. And it would take 14 hours to get from New York to LA instead of 5. I'm sure Americans will love that trade-off. AOC tried to interrupt. Those numbers are inflated by fossil fuel. These numbers are from your own party's analysts, Bongino shot back. These aren't Republican hit pieces. These are the Congressional Budget Office, the Department of Energy, and independent economists trying to make sense of your fantasy. He pulled out more documents. But here's where it gets really interesting. While you're demanding that Americans give up air travel, give up their cars, give up affordable energy, I started wondering, what's your carbon footprint, Congresswoman? So I did some digging. A spreadsheet appeared on screen. Last year, you flew 47 times, 47 flights. That's roughly one flight per week. D.C. to New York to L.A., L.A. to Texas, Texas to Florida, back to D.C. You were on a plane more than most travel bloggers. Your carbon footprint from air travel alone is equivalent to 17 average Americans for an entire year. He zoomed in on two entries. And these are interesting. March 15th and August 7th, private jet flights. Now, your office claimed these were for security reasons, but private jets produce 5 to 14 times more CO2 per passenger than commercial flights. So you took private jets, while telling coal miners in West Virginia they need to learn to code and install solar panels. The audience was riveted. This was the hypocrisy laid bare in numbers. But let's talk about those coal miners, Bongino continued, his voice hardening. Your plan would eliminate fossil fuels completely by 2030. That's roughly 50,000 coal jobs, 120,000 oil and gas jobs, and another 300,000 jobs in related industries. Nearly 500,000 jobs gone. He pulled up more data. Your proposed solution, job retraining programs, green energy jobs. Sounds great in a tweet. But here's reality. The average coal miner makes $67,000 a year. It's hard, dangerous work, but it provides for families. The average solar panel installer makes $32,000 a year. So you're asking these workers to retrain for jobs that pay less than half what they currently make. And you expect them to be grateful? Bongino's voice rose. Let me tell you about a man named Robert Kimball, fictional name for legal reasons, but based on dozens of real people I've met. Robert is 48 years old. He's worked in coal for 26 years. He's got 2 kids in high school, a mortgage, and a wife who works part-time as a nurse. Under your plan, Robert loses his job. He can retrain, sure, 18 months of education, during which he makes nothing. Then he gets a solar installation job for $32,000 a year. His mortgage payment alone is $1,800 a month. His kids' college fund, gone. His retirement, gone. His dignity, shattered. He looked directly at AOC. But you don't care about Robert, do you? Because Robert doesn't live in Brooklyn or Queens. Robert doesn't follow you on Instagram. Robert is part of that irrelevant middle America that you fly over on your way to climate conferences. AOC was getting angry now, which was exactly what Bongino wanted. Let's talk about those climate conferences, Bongino said smoothly. COP26 in Glasgow. You attended. You flew business class. I have the receipts. You stayed at a luxury hotel. I have those receipts too. The hotel's carbon footprint for one night, equal to what the average American produces in a month. But you gave a great speech about sacrifice, so I guess it evens out. He pulled out photographs, some real, some fabricated for this fictional scenario, but all damning. Here you are at a farm-to-table restaurant in Glasgow. Entree price $85. Here you are at a designer shop. Purchase $340. Here you are touring the city in a diesel-powered tour bus, because there's nothing that says climate emergency, like sightseeing in a vehicle that gets 6 miles per gallon. The progressive side of the audience was getting uncomfortable now. These weren't policy disagreements, these were receipts. But let's get back to the real victims of your Green New Deal, Bongino said. Not the coal miners you dismiss as dinosaurs, not the oil workers you consider evil. Let's talk about the grandma in Arizona. He pulled up a cost analysis. Helen Patterson, 76 years old, lives on Social Security, down $400 a month. Her current electric bill in the Phoenix heat, $120 a month. Under Green New Deal mandates, and these numbers come from utility companies analyzing the requirements, her bill would jump to $890 a month. Let me say that again, $890, more than half her entire income, just for electricity. He let that sink in. Or take the Johnson family in Michigan. Factory workers, both parents work at an auto plant making traditional vehicles. Under your plan, that plant closes. They're offered retraining for electric vehicle production. Sounds good, right? Except the new EV plant is 140 miles away. They can't afford to move. They can't afford to commute. They lose their jobs, their home, their stability, all for your vision of the future. Bongino's voice dropped to something almost dangerous. Or consider Frank Martinez, fourth-generation farmer in Iowa. His family has farmed the same land for 98 years. Your Green New Deal requires all farm equipment to be converted to electric. The cost to replace his tractors, combines, and equipment, $340,000. His annual profit, $67,000. You do the math, Congresswoman, because I know you won't. He walked closer to her podium. Your Green New Deal isn't about saving the planet. It's about control. It's about making sure every American is dependent on government programs because you've destroyed their ability to provide for themselves. It's about centralizing power in Washington and making people beg for permission to heat their homes, drive their cars, and live their lives. His voice rose to a crescendo. And while working Americans are choosing between electricity and food, you'll still be flying to conferences, staying in luxury hotels, eating at expensive restaurants, and lecturing everyone else about sacrifice. That's not leadership, Congresswoman. That's a con. That's the oldest scam in the book. Do as I say, not as I do. Rules for thee, but not for me. The audience erupted. Even some progressives were clapping now, caught up in the righteous anger. You want to fight climate change? Bongino said, quieter now, but no less intense. Great. Let's invest in nuclear energy. Let's develop better battery technology. Let's create actual market solutions that don't require destroying millions of lives. But that's not revolutionary enough for you, is it? That's not going to get you on magazine covers. That's not going to make you the face of a movement. He turned to the camera. If you're paying higher energy bills, if you're worried about losing your job to green mandates, if you're tired of being lectured by people who live like carbon doesn't apply to them, comment below, share this. Because the only way this stops is if we make the cost of hypocrisy higher than the benefit of celebrity. AOC was speechless, genuinely unable to formulate a response. The math was too clear, the hypocrisy too obvious, the receipts too damning. And Bongino, he was just getting started. During the next break, you could see AOC's team huddled around her, trying to figure out a strategy. They were losing badly. But she came back for round 4, trying a different approach. Righteous indignation. Mr. Bongino loves to talk about individual examples, she began, her voice sharp. But let's talk about systemic issues. Let's talk about police reform, about how communities of color are over-policed and underprotected, about how we need to reimagine public safety. Reimagine, Bongino repeated, and there was something almost sad in his voice. Is that what we're calling defund the police now? Reimagine? That's some impressive rebranding. Let's roll the tape. A video compilation appeared on screen. AOC at various rallies and interviews over a 2-year period. We need to defund the police. Police budgets are bloated. Policing is fundamentally broken. We can reduce police funding and reinvest in communities. Each clip was dated, sourced, and undeniably her. Those are your words, Congresswoman, Bongino said flatly. Not taken out of context, not deep-faked, not Republican propaganda. Your actual words. You called for defunding police. You marched with activists demanding police budgets be cut. You tweeted it. You said it. You owned it. He paused. Until it became politically inconvenient. Now it's reimagining. But the American people aren't stupid. They remember. And more importantly, they remember what happened in the cities that actually listened to you. A map appeared on screen, showing major cities. Let's tour defund territory, Bongino said grimly. New York City, your city. In 2020, after the defund movement you championed, the NYPD budget was cut by $1 billion. $1 billion. You celebrated. You called it a victory. Want to know what else happened that year? Statistics appeared on screen. Murders up 47%. Shootings up 97%. Hate crimes up 76%. But it wasn't just violent crime. Grand larceny up 66%. Car thefts up 67%. Burglaries up 42%. The city became measurably less safe. Not according to right-wing media, according to the NYPD's own crime statistics. Public record. He moved to the next city. Minneapolis, the epicenter of defund. City Council voted to dismantle the police department. You praised them, called it bold leadership. Results? Carjackings up 537%, 537%. Violent crime up 22%. And here's the kicker. Wealthy neighborhoods hired private security. Poor neighborhoods got nothing but promises and crime. More data appeared. Portland, police budget slashed, officers quit in droves. Response times went from an average of 7 minutes to 18. 18 minutes. Crime skyrocketed. Businesses fled downtown. The city literally erected barriers to protect buildings from the violence. But the city council could feel good about their woke policies, so there's that. Bongino's voice was getting tighter, more controlled, which somehow made it more intense. Seattle, San Francisco, Philadelphia, Chicago, every single city that embraced defund saw the same pattern. Crime up, response times up. Officer morale destroyed. Communities less safe. But you didn't just champion these policies from afar. You celebrated them. You held them up as examples. He pulled out a letter, his hands almost shaking. This is from Keisha Washington. She's 42, single mother of 3, lives in the South Bronx, one of your constituents. She wrote to me after her 19-year-old son Marcus was killed in a robbery that could have been prevented. He read directly from the letter, and his voice was thick with emotion. Mr. Bongino, my son was walking home from his job at the grocery store. 2 men tried to rob him. He had nothing in his pocket. They shot him for $47. I called 911 at 10:47 p.m. The police arrived at 11:10 p.m., 23 minutes. Before defund, the average response time in my neighborhood was 8 minutes. If they'd arrived in 8 minutes, maybe Marcus would still be alive. Maybe I'd still have my son. But our congresswoman said we needed to defund police. She said we'd be safer. She was wrong, and my son is dead. The studio was absolutely silent. You could hear people breathing. That's Not a statistic, Bongino said quietly. That's a human being. That's a mother who will never see her son again because you prioritized ideology over safety. He looked up at AOC, and there were actual tears in his eyes. How many Marcuses is your revolution worth? How many Keishas have to lose their children before you admit you were wrong? But he wasn't done. Because here's where the hypocrisy gets truly obscene, Bongino continued, his voice hardening again. While you were calling to defund police, while you were marching with activists demanding cops be fired and budgets slashed, what were you doing personally? He pulled out FOIA documents. This is your security detail costs, paid for by Capitol Police and NYPD. Year 1, $387,000. Year 2, $412,000. Year 3, $456,000. Over 3 years, you've cost taxpayers $1.2 million in police protection, while arguing that police budgets should be cut. The hypocrisy was staggering. Let me break this down, Bongino said, his voice dripping with contempt. You get armed security, armed Congresswoman, while simultaneously arguing that police are the problem. You get protection from the very institution you're trying to dismantle. And when someone sends you a mean tweet, you request additional security. But Keisha Washington in the Bronx? She gets a 23-minute response time and a dead son. He pulled out more documents. Here's a call log from your office, requesting police presence at your events. 17 separate requests in 1 year. You wanted police protection when you spoke to your supporters, when you went to galas, when you attended award ceremonies. Police protection for you. But when it comes to regular Americans in high-crime neighborhoods, they can wait. Or better yet, they can call a social worker. The audience was transfixed. And here's my favorite part of this nightmare, Bongino said. You've also voted consistently for strict gun control. You want to make it nearly impossible for law-abiding citizens to protect themselves. So let me get this straight. You want to defund the police that protect regular Americans. You want to disarm regular Americans so they can't protect themselves. And you want armed security for yourself, because you're special. He walked right up to her podium, close enough that she had to look up at him. That's not social justice, Congresswoman. That's aristocracy. That's let them eat cake while you live behind walls with armed guards. Police protection for you, but not for the grandmother in your district who's terrified to leave her apartment after dark. Security for you, but not for the bodega owner who's been robbed 3 times this year because police response times have tripled. Armed guards for you, but lectures about privilege for the single father who just wants a legal handgun to protect his family. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but it carried through the studio like thunder. You know what the real tragedy is? Officers wanted to protect people. Good cops, and most of them are good, wanted to serve their communities. But you made them the enemy. You made their jobs impossible. You made them choose between doing their jobs and being called murderers. And when they quit in droves, when morale collapsed, when response times skyrocketed, when crime surged, you blamed everyone but yourself. He turned back to the camera. If you or someone you love has been affected by rising crime, if you've waited desperately for police who couldn't come fast enough, if you've lost someone because politicians chose ideology over safety, share this, comment. Because Marcus Washington deserves better. Kesha Washington deserves better. And every American deserves politicians who value their safety as much as they value their own. AOC tried to respond, tried to pivot to police brutality statistics, but her voice was shaking, and the words weren't landing. The human cost was too high, the hypocrisy too obvious, and Dan Bongino had 2 more rounds to go. The moderator tried to steer things toward closing statements, but Bongino wasn't finished. AOC looked exhausted, beaten down, but she tried one more gambit, returning to her core message. "At the end of the day," she said, trying to sound defiant, "I'm fighting for democratic socialism, for a system that puts people over profits, for economic justice and equality." Bongino actually laughed. Not a polite chuckle, a genuine, full-throated laugh. "Oh, we're going to talk about your commitment to socialism," he said, grinning now. "This is going to be fun. Because, Congresswoman, you're not a socialist. You're a capitalist with excellent branding. And I can prove it." He pulled out a thick folder. "Let's talk about your campaign store, AOCstore.com. Very popular with young progressives. Sells merchandise with slogans like Tax the Rich, Green New Deal, Eat the Rich. Very revolutionary, very anti-capitalist. Except for one tiny detail. You're making a fortune off it." Financial documents appeared on screen. 2-year revenue from your campaign store, $4.2 million. That's million with an M. After production costs, shipping, and overhead. Your net profit, $2.8 million. Now, I'm no socialist, but I'm pretty sure making $2.8 million selling T-shirts that say, "Tax the Rich," is the most capitalist thing I've ever heard of. The audience laughed, and even some progressives were shaking their heads. "But it gets better," Bongino continued. "Where are these shirts made? Your website doesn't say. Very mysterious. But independent journalists did some digging. The manufacturer appears to be based overseas, not union-made, possibly Bangladesh or Vietnam. So you're selling anti-capitalism merchandise made in countries with some of the lowest labor standards in the world. The irony is so thick, I could sell it." He zoomed in on profit margins. Your Tax the Rich T-shirt retails for $30, production cost, approximately $4.50. Markup, 566%. You're making better profit margins than most corporations. You're literally the capitalist pig your own slogans warn about. More documents appeared. But let's talk about where that money goes. Campaign finance filings show that only 22% of your merchandise revenue goes to actual campaign operations, 22%. Where does the rest go? Consulting fees, speaking fees, administrative costs, and my personal favorite category, strategic communications, which includes payments to your boyfriend, Riley Roberts, won $20,000 over 2 years for marketing. Want to know what marketing work he did? Nobody knows. There's no portfolio, no documented deliverables, just $120,000 paid to your boyfriend. AOC was turning red. "But wait, there's more," Bongino said, channeling infomercial energy. "Let's talk about your personal financial journey. It's a real American success story." A timeline appeared on screen. 2018. You're a bartender. Student loans, shared apartment, used car, living paycheck to paycheck. The struggling working-class hero. That's your brand. That's your image. The timeline advanced. 2019, first year in Congress. Year in, you spend $7,000 on wardrobe. That's more than the average American household makes in a year. You upgrade to a luxury apartment in D.C. You start showing up in designer outfits to galas, including the Met Gala, where tickets cost $35,000, wearing a dress that says, "Tax the Rich." Chef's kiss for the irony. The timeline continued. 2020. You buy a Tesla, $48,000. You start vacationing in upscale locations. Your Instagram goes from subway rides to rooftop lounges. 2021, you're spotted wearing designer glasses. That watch, $380. Those shoes at the climate conference, $420. 22, your estimated net worth hits $1.5 million. In 4 years, you went from broke bartender to millionaire congresswoman. You didn't just live the American dream, you speed ran it. Bongino leaned against his podium. And there's nothing wrong with that. This is America. You're allowed to make money. You're allowed to be successful. You're allowed to enjoy the fruits of capitalism. But, and this is a huge but, you can't do all of that while lecturing everyone else about the evils of capitalism. You can't get rich selling anti-capitalism merchandise. You can't become a millionaire and then tell working people they shouldn't aspire to wealth. He pulled out more campaign finance records. Let's talk about your campaign spending. $67,000 at high-end restaurants in 1 year. Strategy meetings, according to the filings, at Michelin-starred restaurants. Because apparently, the best place to plan progressive revolution is over $85 entrees. Photos appeared on screen. AOC at various expensive establishments. Here's the thing that really gets me, Bongino said, his voice taking on an edge. You love to attack billionaires. Nobody needs that much money, you say. Billionaires are immoral. Okay, let's apply your logic to you. He pulled out a comparison chart. Your congressional salary, $174,000. The median household income in your district, the people you represent, $59,000. By your own standards of what's moral and necessary, you make 3 times more than you need. You're hoarding wealth that could be redistributed to struggling families in Queens. He looked directly at her. So here's my challenge, Congresswoman, and I'm making it right here, right now, on live television. If you really believe in your principles, if you really think nobody needs more than they can use, if you really believe wealth should be redistributed, do it. Take your salary down to $59,000 and donate the rest to families in your district. Move out of your luxury apartment and get a modest place in Queens. Sell your Tesla and take the subway like your constituents. Cancel your designer wardrobe and shop at Target. Live your values. The silence was deafening. You won't do it, Bongino said flatly, because you don't actually believe in socialism. You believe in socialism for thee, but capitalism for me. You figured out how to build a personal brand around attacking success while quietly becoming successful yourself. You discovered that the best way to make money in America is to be the most visible anti-capitalist. It's brilliant, actually. Evil, but brilliant. He gathered his papers. You're not a revolutionary, Congresswoman. You're an entrepreneur who found a niche market. You're selling the fantasy of socialism to people who don't understand that you're the one getting rich off the transaction. You're the girl boss capitalist wrapped in a democratic socialist costume. And the saddest part, your supporters can't even see it. The conservative side of the audience erupted. Even some progressives looked uncomfortable, confronted with facts they couldn't refute. You want to talk about the billionaire class? Bongino continued. You're on your way to joining them. You're just doing it by selling revolution instead of selling products. But it's the same game. Find a market, exploit it, make money. That's not socialism. That's the most capitalist thing in the world. AOC looked devastated. Her core identity was being dismantled on live television, and she had no defense. Because the numbers were real, the receipts were genuine, and the hypocrisy was undeniable. If you're tired of socialist politicians living like capitalists, Bongino said to the camera, if you're sick of being lectured about greed by people who figured out how to monetize revolution, Share this everywhere, because the con only works if people don't see it. There was no break before the final round. AOC was visibly shaken, her team frantically passing notes, but Bongino gave her no time to recover. His tone shifted one final time. Less attack dog, more prosecutor delivering a closing argument. "You know what, Congresswoman," he began, his voice almost gentle. "I almost feel bad. Almost. Because I grew up in Queens, too. Same streets, same struggles, different generation, but the same dreams. And I remember what it was like to watch politicians promise everything and deliver nothing." He walked to center stage, away from his podium, more intimate now. "But unlike you, I'm not here to make promises. I'm here because someone has to hold you accountable. Someone has to speak for the people you forgot. And I've got their voices right here." He pulled out a stack of letters. "These are from your constituents, real people, real letters. I'm going to read some of them, and I want you to look me in the eye while I do." He opened the first letter. "Maria, 62 years old, retired teacher. Dear Mr. Bongino, I voted for her because she said she'd fight for us. She said she understood what it was like to struggle. But my prescription costs went up 40%. My rent went up $300 a month. My grandson can't find a job. I called her office 17 times. 17 times. I never got a call back. But I see her on TV every day, fighting for people in other places, talking about national issues. What about us? What about the people who elected her? We're invisible to her now." Bongino looked up. AOC wouldn't meet his eyes. "James, 41, small business owner. I had to close my restaurant after 30 years. My father started it. I was supposed to pass it to my son. But the regulations, the mandates, the shutdown rules that made no sense. I couldn't survive. I asked for help. I called her office. I wrote emails. Nothing. But she found time to go to the Met Gala. She found time to be on magazine covers. She didn't find time for me. My family's legacy is gone, and she doesn't even know my name." Another letter. "Rosa, 28, nurse. I worked through COVID, double shifts, triple shifts, scared every day that I'd bring it home to my family. She called us heroes. She applauded us. Then, when there was a bill that would have given healthcare workers tax relief, she voted against it because it wasn't progressive enough. That bill would have saved me $4,000. That's 3 months of my student loan payments. But it wasn't pure enough for her ideology, so she voted no. Heroes are for photo ops, I guess. Actual help is too complicated." Bongino's voice was thick with emotion now. "These aren't my words. These are your constituents, the people you swore to represent, the people who believed in you, and they're not alone." He pulled out a comprehensive document. "I had researchers compile data on your district, real data, federal statistics. The results are devastating." Statistics appeared on screen. "Since you took office, unemployment in Y14 is up 3.2%. Small business closures up 47%. Median income down 8% when adjusted for inflation. Quality of life surveys show resident satisfaction down 31 points. Meanwhile, the national average for similar districts, improving. Your district is getting worse while you're getting more famous." He let that sink in. "But it's not just your district. Let's talk about your role in Congress. Your legislative effectiveness score, that's a nonpartisan measure of how successful you are at actually passing legislation, ranks 230th out of 240 Democratic members. You've sponsored 23 bills. None have passed. 0. You've been in Congress for 4 years. and haven't passed a single piece of legislation. More data appeared. Committee attendance, 67%, below average. Floor votes. You've missed 11% of votes. Your predecessor missed 3%. Town halls held with constituents, 12 in 4 years. Your predecessor averaged 58 per term. You're objectively worse at the actual job of being a congresswoman than the person you replaced. Bongino's voice rose. But you know what you're great at? Media. You've made 847 media appearances in 4 years. That's one every 1.7 days. You're on TV more than most actors. You've been on magazine covers 14 times. The estimated media value of your coverage, $200 million. You're a celebrity who happens to have a congressional seat. He walked closer to her podium. You became famous by fighting the establishment, while becoming the establishment. You became a brand, while your constituents became statistics. You monetized revolution, while people in your district couldn't afford rent. You became everything you claimed to oppose, and you did it so gradually that your supporters didn't notice until it was too late. His voice dropped to something almost sad. But let's talk about what this really is. Your ideology, democratic socialism. You wear it like a badge. You make it your identity. Let me tell you what that ideology has accomplished everywhere it's been tried. He pulled out historical examples. Venezuela, thriving economy in the 1990s, richest country in South America. Then socialism. Now people are eating zoo animals. Inflation hit 1,000,000%. The average Venezuelan has lost 24 pounds because there's no food. But the socialist leaders? They're still wealthy, still powerful. Funny how that works. More examples. Cuba. Revolution promised prosperity for all. 60 years later, doctors make $20 a month. People risk their lives on rafts to escape. But the Castro family, estimated net worth $900 million. Revolutionary leaders always seem to do well under socialism. Soviet Union collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. 70 years of socialist paradise resulted in breadlines, secret police, and millions dead. But the party members? They had dachas, and cars, and food. Bongino's voice was sharp now. Every single time, every single place, socialism promises equality and delivers tyranny. It promises prosperity and delivers poverty. It promises power to the people and delivers power to the elite. And the people who push it hardest? They always exempt themselves from the consequences. He pointed at her. You stand there with your iPhone, made by capitalism. Your Tesla, made by capitalism. Your designer wardrobe, made by capitalism. Your luxury apartment, made by capitalism. Everything you have, everything you enjoy, everything that makes your life comfortable, was created by the system you want to destroy. His voice rose to a crescendo. You want to tear down capitalism, not because you have a better system. You want to tear it down because if everyone's equally poor, your lifestyle looks less hypocritical. If everyone's dependent on government, your power increases. If everyone needs permission to succeed, you become the gatekeeper. It's not about justice, and it's about control. He pulled out one final document, held it up. This is a petition. 23,000 signatures from your constituents calling for your recall. 23,000 people who voted for you, believed in you, trusted you, and now they want you gone. He read from it. Miguel Rodriguez, she forgot where she came from. Jennifer Walsh, she's not for us anymore. David Park, I want someone who actually shows up. Lisa Chen, I need a representative, not a celebrity. Marcus Johnson, She broke every promise she made. Bongino's voice broke slightly. 23,000 people. That's not a vocal minority. That's not right-wing propaganda. That's your own constituents saying you failed them. He walked right up to her, close enough that the camera could capture both of them in frame. You wanted a revolution, Congresswoman. You got one. But it's not the one you expected. It's the people you abandoned realizing they don't need you. It's the families you forgot deciding they won't forget you. It's the revolution of common sense against your elite socialism. His voice softened but remained firm. You asked me earlier what I stand for. I'll tell you now. I stand for Maria, who can't afford her prescriptions while you expense $300 dinners. I stand for James, who lost his life's work while you posed for magazine covers. I stand for Rosa, who saved lives and got nothing but empty praise while you collected $400,000 in security costs. I stand for Keisha Washington, whose son died while police response times tripled because you championed defund. I stand for the 25,000 families who never got Amazon jobs because you chose ideology over opportunity. He looked directly into the camera, ignoring AOC entirely now. I stand for every person you flew over on your way to your next television appearance. Every constituent whose call you never returned. Every small business that closed while you championed regulations. Every worker who lost their job while you preached about justice from your luxury apartment. He turned back to AOC one final time. That's the difference between us, Congresswoman. I remember where I came from. You forgot. I represent people. You represent a brand. I fight for constituents. You fight for followers. I care about results. You care about retweets. The silence in the studio was absolute. And when this is all over, when the cameras stop rolling and the applause fades and the media moves on to the next shiny object, you'll still be a millionaire celebrity, and Maria will still be choosing between food and medicine. James will still have a closed restaurant. Rosa will still be paying her student loans. Keisha will still be missing her son. His final words were barely above a whisper, but they echoed through the studio. You're a fraud, Congresswoman. A well-marketed, expertly branded social media-savvy fraud. You sold people hope and gave them nothing but disappointment. You promised revolution and delivered celebrity. You claimed to fight for the working class while becoming the elite. He gathered his papers, put them back in the briefcase, and closed it with a definitive click. I'm done. I've said what needed to be said. I've shown the receipts. The American people can decide for themselves. But they can't say they weren't warned. They can't say they didn't know. Because now everybody knows exactly who Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez really is. The moderator tried to give AOC a chance to respond. She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. Her hands were shaking. This is all taken out of context, she finally managed, but her voice had no conviction. Congresswoman, Bongino said quietly, I gave you context, 37 pages of it. The only thing out of context is you thinking you could keep the con going forever. She tried again. The issues are more complex than your hypocrisy, than your failed policies, than the people you abandoned. There's no complexity here. You promised to represent working people, and instead, you became a celebrity. That's not complex. That's just sad. AOC stood up, removed her microphone, and walked off stage. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't make a statement. Just left. Her team scrambled after her. The audience sat in stunned silence for a moment. Then, slowly, the conservative side began to applaud. Then the applause grew. Then it became a standing ovation. Not for theatrics, not for entertainment, for accountability. The hashtag Bongino Receipts was trending #1 on Twitter within 17 minutes, before the show even ended. The clips were viral. Every major news outlet, left and right, had to cover it. They couldn't ignore it. The receipts were too documented, the hypocrisy too obvious, the collapse too complete. By the next morning, AOC's district office was flooded with calls. Most of them weren't supportive. Her primary challenger, who had been considered a long shot, announced a major endorsement from a union that had previously supported AOC. Donors started pulling funding. Squad members began carefully distancing themselves with carefully worded statements about focusing on their own districts. Within a week, her approval rating in Y14 had dropped 34 points. The petition for recall gained another 15,000 signatures. Town halls were scheduled, and this time she'd have to show up, because the cameras would be there whether she was or not. Cable news played the confrontation on loop. Not just conservative outlets, everyone. Because it wasn't partisan talking points. It was documented evidence. It was receipts. It was accountability in an age where politicians had forgotten that word. Political communication courses at universities added the footage to their curriculum, not as an example of debate tactics, but as a case study in what happens when preparation meets opportunity, when documentation defeats deflection, when accountability catches up with hypocrisy. But the real impact was quieter and more profound. Maria, the 62-year-old retired teacher, got a call from a primary challenger asking about her concerns. James, the restaurant owner, was interviewed by local news about how policies affect small businesses. Rosa, the nurse, testified before a city council committee about healthcare worker support. Kesha Washington's story was finally told in a national magazine, and a scholarship fund in Marcus's name was established. The people AOC had forgotten suddenly had voices again. Their stories mattered again, not because Dan Bongino was a hero, he'd be the first to say he wasn't, but because someone with a platform used it to give them one. What happened that night wasn't just about one politician's hypocrisy. It was about a reckoning that was long overdue. It was about the distance between promises and results, between performance and service, between brand building and actual representation. It was about the moment when receipts became more powerful than rhetoric, when documentation defeated deflection, when the people who'd been ignored finally had someone amplify their voices loud enough that they couldn't be ignored anymore. Dan Bongino didn't defeat Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez that night. Her own actions did, her own choices, her own hypocrisy. He just did the research, organized the evidence, and presented it in a way that couldn't be dismissed or deflected. That briefcase contained 37 pages, but really, it contained something more important: accountability. The radical idea that politicians should be judged by their results, not their rhetoric, by their service, not their social media, by whether they help their constituents, not whether they help their brand. It's been 18 months since that night. AOC is still in Congress, but she's no longer the star. She lost her prime committee assignments. Her media appearances dropped by 76%. She faces the strongest primary challenge of her career, from a candidate who uses one tagline: "Show up for Queens." Her merchandise store shut down after journalists discovered the overseas manufacturing. Her book deal was quietly canceled. Her speaking fees dropped from $40,000 per appearance to $8,000. Her boyfriend Riley is no longer on campaign payroll. Her Instagram following actually decreased, a rare feat for a politician. She moved out of the luxury apartment back to Queens, to a more modest place. Started taking the subway again, but not for photo ops because she had to. Started holding town halls, but they're different now. Quieter. More people asking hard questions. Fewer cameras. More accountability. Dan Bongino? He's still doing his show. Still holding politicians accountable. Still doing the research and keeping the receipts. The briefcase became iconic. He auctioned it off for charity, raising $340,000 for small business recovery funds in Queens. But more importantly, a generation of journalists and activists learned something that night. Receipts matter. Documentation matters. Preparation matters. Accountability matters. You can't just promise revolution. You have to deliver results. You can't just build a brand. You have to serve your constituents. You can't just talk about fighting for people. You actually have to fight for them. And if you don't, eventually someone will notice. Someone will document it. Someone will present the evidence. And the house of cards will fall. It took 4 minutes and 17 seconds to expose the truth. It took 37 pages of receipts. It took one former Secret Service agent who did his homework and gave a damn about accountability. But most importantly, it took Americans finally saying enough. Enough with the hypocrisy. Enough with the socialism for thee but capitalism for me. Enough with the celebrity politicians who forget the people who elected them. Enough with the promises that never become results. Enough with the performance of caring, replacing actually caring. That night, in a television studio with millions watching, accountability won. A movement that valued rhetoric over results got confronted with reality. A politician who thought celebrity was the same as accomplishment learned that eventually the bill comes due. And a socialist who loved capitalism learned the hardest lesson of all. In a free market of ideas, the truth is the ultimate competitor. And when someone shows up with receipts, no amount of brand building can save you. If you believe in accountability over celebrity, if you think politicians should answer to people instead of cameras, if you're tired of promises without results, share this story. Comment with your own experience of politicians who forgot who they work for. Because this isn't just about one congresswoman. This is about every elected official who needs to remember. We're watching. We're keeping receipts. And we're done being fooled. The Bongino briefcase wasn't just filled with papers. It was filled with the voices of forgotten constituents. And once those voices are heard, they can never be silenced.